This is a special report from ABC News Digital.
I'm Dan Klepler in New York with this ABC News Digital special report. President Obama lost faith in his Afghanistan policy, in particular a 30,000 troop surge. That is according to a new memoir from former Defense Secretary Bob Gates. Gates runs the Defense Department under President Bush and continued in that role for the President Obama, a trusted advisor to so many presidents, having worked for 8 in all, dating back to the Nixon administration. His comments now providing an unusually unfiltered look inside the Obama White House. So joining us now with an in-depth look at the politics of all of these revelations is ABC's Devin Dwyer, and from Gates' old headquarters at the Pentagon, digital journalist Louis Martinez. Guys, thanks for being with us. Devin, tell us a little bit more about why Gates had said this. Why did the president keep him essentially there when he stands to lose those troops being sent in?
Well, Dan, this book is a bit of a bombshell. It's due out later this month, but as you mentioned, some reports coming out today from the Washington Post and New York Times with some previews of Gates' comments. And you know, what makes these so surprising is how revered Gates was really as a career civil servant here in Washington, serving 8 presidents. He served both under George W. Bush and President Obama. And so with that context, these comments about his leadership style while President Obama is still in office is certainly stunning to many observers here. And as you mentioned, raises some serious questions or some questions of leadership of the president. Really something of a split picture, though, and I think Louis can speak to a little bit of this. At once, Gates describes President Obama as a man of integrity, a rigorous thinker, says the decision to go after Osama bin Laden was one of the most courageous he's ever seen in the White House, but at the same time, he suggests the president wasn't really fully comprehending and respecting what it means to run a war, and really when it came to his strategy regarding the surge of troops in Afghanistan, he wasn't really fully on board with his own strategy, even as he was ordering those troops into combat. Quite a claim.
And Gates has said that he had commitment in the troops themselves, but not necessarily in the mission. And Louis, I want to bring you into that then, because in the book, Gates recalls a March 2011 meeting during which President Obama expressed his frustration over the lack of progress in Afghanistan. And this is what he writes, quote, "As I sat there, I thought, the president doesn't trust his commander, can't stand Karzai, doesn't believe in his own strategy, and doesn't consider the war to be his. For him, it's all about getting out." Louis, do the president's actions bear that out?
Well, remember, this is the strategy that President Obama developed in 2009 because he wanted a coherent strategy for the Afghanistan-Pakistan region, because he said that if we're going to commit to troops, we have to commit to a long-term strategy of involvement in Afghanistan, that it's not just going to be troops, that there's going to be diplomatic initiatives, that we're going to be talking about actual infrastructural building within Afghanistan. So that whole process took off in 2009. Remember, there was a meeting after meeting at the White House, and there was the famous assessment from General Stanley McChrystal, the top commander at the time, and he said, "I need more troops if we're going to carry out with this." And by the end of the year, the president said, "Yes, we're going to send 30,000 more troops," and that ramped up the number of U.S. troops in Afghanistan 100,000, the most there had ever been there in that decade-long war. Well, 2 years later, this is the meeting in March 2011. You're hearing Gates saying that he's sitting there in the White House listening to the president, and that when they're talking about Afghanistan, it sounds like he has doubts about the strategy that he had his team craft, and that basically from what he's seen, there's such a lack of progress on his part, that the relationship with Hamid Karzai had gone south, that General Petraeus, who was the new commander at that point, maybe was mouthing off in the press is the way it comes across, and that he just really had lost any sense that this mission would complete successfully. So that's startling to hear, because publicly you've heard the president talk about how he is committed to this strategy and that the United States is not going to abandon the region. And we have this ongoing, struggle right now about whether the U.S. is going to get a signature from Hamid Karzai on this bilateral security agreement that may ensure that U.S. troops continue after this pullout of 2014. So a lot of public comments, but privately it sounds like the president doubted that this would be a successful program.
So Devin, Gates also commented on a difficult working situation at the White House, saying also this: all too early in the Obama administration, suspicion and distrust of senior military officers by senior White House officials became a big problem for me as I tried to manage the relationship between the commander-in-chief and his military leaders. So how has the relationship between the White House and military leaders evolved then over these past 5 years?
Well, it's interesting that Gates is revealing this at this time, similar to the point Louis just made about a public face and now learning of some private details. We've always seen the president and his military leaders put on a public show of respect and professionalism, and but underlying all that have been some tensions. And I think that some of these revelations in Gates's memoir here really underscore that this is a president who, from the beginning, quite honestly, was uncomfortable with these two wars that he inherited. We know that he campaigned as someone who wanted to bring them to an end, and now campaigned for re-election as someone who is bringing them to an end. It's something that he's celebrating now. And this tension that is now being described in the book, I think, is part of that. A certain suspicion, mistrust of military brass that he brought with him into the White House, and certainly an uncomfortable situation now because he's still there. But I think at the end of the day, Dan, this really illustrates, serves to underscore and illustrate that this is a president who never really wanted to be part of these wars to begin with.
Well, Louis, let me ask you this then, from the Pentagon's point of view, where did they feel the White House went wrong in pursuing goals in Afghanistan? I
don't know that they've actually felt that, Dan. They felt they needed more troops back in 2009. They got the commitment from the Obama White House that they were going to get those troops. McChrystal never expressed any doubts that he needed more troops beyond what he got, even in his own memoir, if I recall correctly. So I think there has been satisfaction that the White House has provided the military with what it needs in Afghanistan. One thing that I think has come out, though, is whether this commitment of whether the U.S. needs to have an enduring presence beyond 2014. One of the things that we've heard come out about, since Afghanistan hasn't signed this agreement yet, is that the White House still is considering this zero troop option, where they may pull out all of the troops as they did in Iraq 2 years ago. So there's the sense among some military commanders that they feel that that would be the wrong thing to do. You hear that privately, but again, I think in terms of the strategy and the troops and the support that they received in the build-up to now, I think that's been okay.
Devin, the president not the only one being criticized in this memoir. Vice President Joe Biden as well, at the target of some words there, who is frankly used to a particular type of attack, especially by Republicans. But the former Secretary of Defense wrote this, that the VP has, quote, been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades. Is this just politics now? Did the former Secretary of Defense have anything positive to say about the administration?
Well, the Secretary of Defense, to be fair, and let's just take a step back, Dan, I mean, the early descriptions of this book, and we haven't read, or at least I haven't read the full 600 pages, but it's generally a balanced, mixed picture of the administration. It's honest, it has its criticisms, and we're certainly talking about some of the more colorful lines, if you will, but it does appear that Bob Gates has taken a fairly even-handed approach here. But yes, on this line, he is very critical against the vice president. We did know for some time that the two were at odds over certain policy decisions, but this line, to say that the vice president was basically wrong on every major foreign policy issue for 40 years is quite something. From this former defense secretary with a long career here in Washington. You can bet this will appear in a campaign ad if he runs for president in 2016. We should also say, though, that there's a little bit of criticism in here of Hillary Clinton, and we can talk about that, though he did also have some very positive words to say about her death.
Well, and I wanted, if you wouldn't mind just elaborating on that before we bring Louis back into the situation, because I do want to find out a little bit kind of how this is going to play or have any kind of an impact on our current strategy in Afghanistan. But you bring up the point, though, Devin, that in fact Gates' head did also mention others that were in the Obama cabinet.
That's right. There are two big tidbits in this book that will potentially influence the 2016 campaign, and two big Democratic names, right? Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, both rumored to be pursuing presidential bids here. The comment we just mentioned there about Biden being wrong, according to Bob Gates, on these major foreign policy issues, certainly a damning statement. But there's also a revelation in the book. Bob Gates says that he was in a meeting with Hillary Clinton and President Obama, during which Secretary of State Clinton said that she basically opposed the Iraq troop surge in 2007. This after she supported the intervention there. She opposed the troop surge simply because the Iowa caucuses were on the horizon. They were right around the corner. And so is it a big surprise that she would have made a decision like that or taken a stance based on politics? Well, not really, but it certainly does fuel a storyline that her critics will use in a potential campaign, that she's someone not of principle but of expediency.
And as we know, of course, presidential campaigns have a way of running in cycles in a very expedient way.
That's right.
Louis, lastly, stepping then away from the infighting that is going on in Washington, what is the state of play right now in Afghanistan today? I mean, are we calling this surge a success?
Well, this was 2.5 years ago that, 4 years now that since the surge began, and it ramped up to 100,000, and there are now 38,000 U.S. troops there, and potentially headed to 0, maybe 14. I mean, it's unclear what the final number will be after the pullout in 2014. The real issue here is Hamid Karzai going to sign this deal in the next couple of weeks, as military leaders have been pressing, because they say they need to get the planning right so that the president can make a decision about what kind of force levels he wants to keep. But everybody's up in the air because Karzai is saying he wants to wait until an election. Well, the election doesn't kick off until April. And unless there's a runoff, there could be a further election beyond that. So how long is this going to go on? There's a lot of uncertainty now about how big of a U.S. presence there will be after 2014, or if there even will be one, because this is continuing to drag out for quite a long time. Ultimately, a lot of confidence still in the Afghan security forces and how they're handling the situation. They still lack a lot of logistical and resourcing and aviation assets, and that's something that's going to need to be worked on over the next couple of years. But for right now here, it's depending on the concern is getting Karzai to sign that bilateral security agreement.
And we'll have to wait and see if something like this will have any kind of an impact on the negotiations and the relationship back and forth between Afghanistan and the United States. It's called Duty, Memoirs of a Secretary at War. It's coming out January 14th. ABC's Louis Martinez from the Pentagon, Devin Dwyer also from Washington. Gentlemen, thank you both. We appreciate your time. Of course, for the latest on the fallout from former Secretary of Defense Bob Gates' tell-all, stay right here on abcnews.com. For now, I'm Dan Pfeffler in New York with this ABC News Digital Special Report.